Into a new stand, you look at the stumps, see how many stumps there are. Sometimes there's no stumps at all. I'll show you a place where we cut it for the first time. And you know, you look at the different sizes of the stumps. Species also sometimes helps. A lot of times it was just cedar and big Douglas fir, but here you can see there's smaller stumps or medium-sized stumps, and then these large old growth stumps. So this is, and these trees being only 40 to 50 years old tells me that this is the third rotation of trees, and this area here has been cut twice before. Okay, here is an old kind of borrow source area that has been pretty well played out, but you can tell they've dug back in there. This was potentially also an old landing for when they've logged this, like I said, twice in the past. It's probably been a landing twice now. Maybe they needed to dig back into the hillside to make room for the tower, if they did with a tower. A lot of times early logging methods used cable logging and today we would be using ground-based methods because they didn't have the type of machinery that we have today. But I think part of the reason this was abandoned too, this borrow source, was because it's extremely wet. You can see this colt's foot here, Petasites palmatum, I think it is. Forgive me on some of my Latin is not correct, and I know they've changed some of the Latin names of some of these plants recently. So forgive me for not getting the new names right. We've got Devil's Club. Got all these holes here, freshly dug holes from mountain beaver. You know, mountain beaver really like to live around wet areas too, especially on hillsides. I don't exactly know why. It seems like it would be kind of damp in there, but a lot of times they'll line their holes with certain types of vegetation like skunk cabbage and things like that they've harvested. You can see the fresh rocks and stuff. So the mountain beaver there, great example too of creature, macro, you know, vertebrate creature that is tilling the soil, is mixing the soil up here. But you can see colt's foot, Devil's Club, and then also elderberry. Not always in wet sites, but does like wetter soils. If you've got, you know, a mix of 3 or 4 of those plants that aren't necessarily obligates, then you start to get into hydric soils. If you've got an obligate, then you're definitely in hydric soils. So you can see back there, hopefully, that the light opens up. That's a stream actually from that other wet spot that we're looking at. Actually ended up being the headwaters of a type 4 stream that goes down that way. The further it goes, the more energy it builds up, and it gets steeper and steeper as well, and starts to cut into the soil and the hillside here. And again, we've got big old stump back there, Devil's Club, another big old stump, a lot of logging debris in here. Again, potentially this was the landing in the, you know, in the past, at least one or both times it was logged. You see more Devil's Club here. You see it opening up. You know, the forest was a bit denser here, but you see a lot of vine maple now coming up. You see trees that have fallen down, some wind throw, and then you start to see some skunk cabbage down there. You also notice, I mean, we're on the bank of the road here too, not a great example, because side casts can tend to slough off over time because, you know, especially on the sides, it's got gravity fighting against it. If it's not the best material, or, you know, just over time, again, gravity and water, you know, forcing that side cast to fail. A lot of times too, if you have, like we mentioned, that compacted glacial impervious surface, and you put a road on top of that, imagine over time the water, you know, just going across that impervious surface and just kind of eroding away until eventually it slides off the material that you've either placed there, the material soil that's built up there over time. But, you know, I come into this type of area, I see skunk cabbage, I see these pistol budding trees here, how they're pistol budded up here, and this looks like an active kind of surface slide area. Not a deep-seated glacial slide, but there's definitely some movement going on here. It's affected the trees for the last 40 years. You can tell it's flat in there with the skunk cabbage, which is a obligate species. You've got a forested wetland in here. This one gets a little complex because there's this opened area here. All that vine maple, the Douglas fir have all, you know, they probably planted it in here, but they've died or grown up and fallen over when they were probably 20 or 30 years old. I keep getting more devil's club in here. You know, a lot of times too, they'll drop those older trees and they didn't use them, they didn't yard them out, and they act as a dam. And then so imagine, you know, if this was an old landing in here and the machinery compacted it and just laying the logs here and then putting logs perpendicular to the slope bank, to the way the slope's going, it's just going to block that surface moisture and create a little dam there. Now here we actually have a culvert, if you can see, that is affecting greatly this wet area in here, because you can look and the trees are still pretty dense, but this culvert here is taking all this water that's coming out of that hillside back there where we had that old borrow source. I look up top 100 feet up or so, and I see another open area with a bunch of alder and no conifer. That tells me it's wet up there probably too. And I also know, because of looking at the site and being on this site, that there's an old road grade that runs along the top of the ridge up there. And so that old road grade's also collecting water and maybe creating an area that's going to retain water and be a wetter area. You can see this fresh wind throw here, uprooted tree with skunk cabbage coming. We have water running, and these special management tags mean that this is a wetland area that we are going to thin. The white tags mean the boundary of equipment limitation, so we're not going to let any equipment in there because it's way too wet, and it's going to further compact the soils and, you know, create more problems in the future as far as you know, increasing the size of this wetland basically. But yeah, over here some more skunk cabbage. And yeah, you can look back through here now, see some dead standing snags that have recently died, and that hole that's opened up back there where you have a wet area. It's either forested wetland or a stream or both. And then in here you've got this skunk cabbage, a little bit of water down in there, and then the forest gets thick again and you start to lose those obligate species, and so we get out of this wetland area and into more upland area that is more suitable for growing Douglas fir.